Are you interested in getting into precision rifle or long range shooting, but don't know where to start? Stick around. Hey, what's up, and welcome back to the HK Rifle Works YouTube channel. So today, I kind of wanted to jump into getting started with precision rifle or long range precision rifle shooting. So whether you are just starting out, maybe you've been a time or two, or you go frequently like myself, I'm really hoping this video can build some value for you. And how I think I'm going to set it up is I'm going to go in categories. So I'll do rifle, optics, ammunition, maybe accessories, and I'll give a short answer and then maybe a little bit more of a detailed answer into the why you would choose some of these things. And if you're analytical like me, you may appreciate that. If not, please bear with me. But anyways, just a little background real quick. I've been doing this for a long time. I've had the opportunity and I guess the pleasure of being able to own and try out a ton of gear. I've kind of figured out what works, what doesn't work. So maybe if you're just starting out and you're kind of wondering, hey, do I need to buy this, or where should I allocate my funds? This stuff isn't super cheap to get into. So I know it can kind of be daunting with everything that's out there on the market. You just don't necessarily know kind of what you need off the bat. So again, I'm hoping that builds some value for you. If you like what you see, give us a subscribe, give us a follow, check out some of our other content. We're still essentially a brand new channel, so trying to get that growth, trying to start off. We've got some good reloading videos, some load development videos, and we're starting to get some long range shooting videos up. So again, check it out and stay tuned. Let's jump into it. All right, so first things first, we need to take a quick look at rifle selection. Now there's plenty of different styles of rifles out there, but the ones that you see shooting long range most are either bolt action precision rifles or accurized gas guns like the AR-15, AR-10, SR-25 pattern rifles. So when I'm selecting a rifle that I'm going to shoot long range with, the first thing that I look at is what is its potential to be precise. So how small can it group at 100 yards? And with my bolt action precision rifles, I keep them under half of an inch, maybe around 0.3, 0.4. With my gas guns, my AR-15 pattern rifles, I usually see those group around 0.7 to 0.8. So when you're selecting a rifle, a good thing to go by is just make sure it groups around an inch or under an inch if you can do that, or if the rifle can do that. And why that's important is because we'll paint a picture of you shooting a rifle that shoots 3 inches at 100 yards. So say you step up to the 1,000-yard mark with that rifle. You make perfect shots, there's no human error, and there's also no wind, so you don't have to worry about human error or environmental factors. At 1,000 yards, that rifle, the cone of fire of that rifle is going to be 30 inches. Again, no human error, no environmental factors in this scenario. So if you think about it, say you're shooting a silhouette target, like a regular silhouette, say it's 30 inches wide. At 1,000 yards, you have absolutely zero room for error. Once you start adding in environmental factors like wind, crosswinds, whether it be full value, half value winds, and so on, or even human error, say you pull a shot, say you make a bad shot, that just makes it that much more difficult to deliver accurate fire on that target. So for example, if you take this rifle, and this rifle shoots, let's just say, a half of an inch at 100 yards. At 1,000 yards, this rifle will shoot a 5-inch group with no environmental factors, no human error on my part. And the nice thing is once you start adding in, say if I pull a shot or induce human error, or say the winds are starting to get tricky and I make a bad wind call, I have a lot more cushion on that target to make accurate fire. So if you think about it, I have so much more room on that target to make an error or my bullet to be pushed around or anything like that, and I'll still get a hit on that target. So again, just the importance of selecting a rifle that shoots around or under an inch if you can get it. And under an inch is completely attainable. There's plenty of rifles out there that are on the shelf that offer a sub MOA guarantee. So that's not out of the question, even from a budget rifle. Next is caliber selection. Now this is not without controversy. You can go online and there are so many people out there that are all about one caliber or hate another caliber. There's caliber debates for pages and pages. You can go on almost infinitely about caliber debates. But use your best judgment when you select a caliber. Say your range only goes out to 600 yards. A 338 Lapua Magnum probably isn't the best caliber for that range. Granted, it will probably be a piece of cake, but it will be definitely overkill for that range. Inversely, let's say you have a mile-long range. Your 16-inch AR-15 that you put a 2 to 10 on top probably isn't going to be the best choice for that. So again, just make sure you use your best judgment and pick the best caliber for the range that you're going to be shooting. As well as that, we also want to take a quick look at barrel length. Barrel length contributes to velocity when we shoot, and velocity is important because the faster the bullet's going at the muzzle, the longer it essentially is stable in flight before it reaches something that's called the transonic barrier, going from supersonic, which is faster than the speed of sound, to subsonic, which is slower than the speed of sound. So essentially, you want to make sure that that bullet stays supersonic or faster than the speed of sound for as long as possible, because then it can destabilize. We'll get into that maybe in a different video. You can have some destabilization. The bullet, think about a football, like a really nice spiral, real tight spiral going down, and a receiver catches it. But say the quarterback makes a really bad throw and the football is just turning end over end. That's usually not too accurate of a throw, right? So that's essentially the same thing that happens with bullets. So make sure that you have the correct barrel length as well as the correct twist rate. And if you're buying a factory rifle that's considered maybe like a precision rifle, it will most likely have the correct twist rate on there. But again, that's important because just like the football analogy, when you select your bullet weight and you select your bullet profile, you want the barrel to spin that bullet at the correct revolution per minute. If it spins it too slow, it's not going to stabilize in flight. If it spins it too fast, it can essentially destabilize when it comes out of your muzzle or when it exits the bore. So make sure you have the correct barrel length and twist rate for the cartridge that you're going to be shooting. Again, the internet is a great place. It's got great information and some really bad information, but use your best judgment and make sure that you select that appropriately. Last but not least on the barrel is barrel weight. Now, I usually shoot medium to heavyweight profile barrels. The nice thing about a heavier weight profile barrel is it doesn't heat up as quick, and you can essentially be accurate for longer strings of fire. Again, this comes with the drawback of being heavy. There are some bench press shooters out there that will shoot essentially straight taper barrels all the way to the muzzle. It's just straight 1.25 inches, and they are heavy suckers. But again, it contributes to accurate fire for a long period of time. Inversely, say you're shooting your hunting rifle out to distance and it has like sporter pencil weight barrel, right? The issue with that is, yes, it can be super lightweight and super portable, but after a few shots, what's going to happen is your groups may start opening up, your barrel may heat up and start to droop a little bit, so on and so forth. So again, use your best judgment for what you're going to use the rifle for. If it's going to be a bench rest rifle, you know, you're going to shoot it from the prone or a supported position only, go with a little heavier weight barrel. If you want to shoot some critters or maybe take your rifle on a hunt or two, maybe go for more of a varmint profile barrel. And again, a good balance for me is like a heavier varmint barrel, somewhere in that category. Again, it really depends on the rifle and its use, but I guess this point is don't get a barrel that's too light. Again, use your best judgment, but don't get a barrel that's too thin. Now, moving on is the stock portion of the rifle. There are plenty of options out here. There are tons of stock options and also tons of chassis options. If you get a traditional stock rifle, make sure you have some sort of bedding in here. You can have pillar bedding, which is at the front and the rear action screws for your action. Make sure you get some sort of bedding, or there's like maybe a mini chassis in the stock, or maybe the rifle manufacturer has bedded the action into it. Don't get yourself a really, really flimsy like hunting or sporter stock. What can happen is, say you have a bipod attached or you're shooting or loading your bipod, it can flex and turn and bend on you when you're kind of driving the rifle getting ready to fire. So if you're going to shoot long range, you can purchase a lightweight stock, but just make sure that the lightweight stock system isn't just going to be too flimsy. Chassis are great. There's plenty of options out there. They're super modular. But it's kind of personal preference. Just make sure you get one that's going to cater and help your rifle be more accurate in the long run. Trigger wise, some rifles come with really, really heavy triggers. I'm talking like 5+ pounds. On my rifles, I shoot about half a pound triggers, around 8 ounces, maybe 6, sometimes up to 10. But you'd be totally good shooting long range comfortably with a trigger that's probably 1.5 pounds to around 3.5 pounds. On my AR-15s and gas guns, I shoot around 3.5 to 4 pound triggers. And on, again, like we said, on the precision bolt guns, I usually shoot around 1/2 pound triggers. So again, find what suits you best, but this is going to be a lighter trigger or a more controllable trigger is going to lead to more practical accuracy, or the ability to deliver accurate fire easier with your rifle. And essentially from that probably covers the rifle. One last thing I would touch on is how you'd like to feed your rifle. I like to choose rifles with detachable box magazines. So I like to be able to literally drop a magazine, put a fresh magazine in, and work from this. There are rifles out there, like say your more traditional hunting style rifles will have internal box magazines, so they may have a floor plate on the bottom of here. A lot of them are hinged, so you can just hinge them open and drop your rounds out if you don't need to shoot them. And you usually have to load them in from the ejection port. And there are some bench rest rifles, which are essentially just single load. So this is just, the bottom of the action is completely sealed. There's no magazine or anything like that. You essentially single feed. I think the box magazine, the detachable box magazine, is the most practical, so that's usually what I go with. But again, it's all going to be personal preference on that. So other than that, I think that wraps it up for the rifle. Let's move on to optic selection. All right, we're starting to run out of daylight, so I thought I'd bust out the desk light for a little bit. So before we get into optics, I realized I failed to mention anything about muzzle devices. So touching base on this real quick, barrels from manufacturers usually come threaded. And this opens up a whole bunch of opportunity for you to run the muzzle device of your choice. So you have an option to run a bare muzzle, or you can put on something like a muzzle brake. And muzzle brakes are good in terms of reducing recoil, but they come at the drawback of concussion. They're very loud. Say you have somebody shooting next to you, they'll probably get fairly annoyed with you after a few shots. But I wanted to touch base on my favorite muzzle attachment, which is a suppressor or silencer. And this is good because obviously it keeps noise down. It reduces recoil a little bit, but a big drawback to this is that it gets hot quickly, and I can essentially see through my optic. It's mirage. It looks like I'm looking through a hot oven or like through a desert or something like that. So what I use is heat mirage mitigators or suppressor covers, and what this does is essentially just keeps that mirage down. So when I'm looking or scanning or trying to read wind or trying to identify something, this is a lot less obtrusive in terms of blurring my vision through my optic. One thing I really like about this suppressor as well, this is the one that I use kind of like for my precision rifles. This is a Dead Air Nomad, but I also have a brake on the end of this, so it kind of acts twofold, if you will. So it kind of reduces recoil just a little bit more, and it's said to reduce the decibel rating by a few decibels too. So it's worked out really well for me, and I really like shooting with it. So over to optics. One thing that I wanted to touch on before getting into it is dispelling the myth, and I hear it far too often, is when people select their glass, the first thing that they go for in terms of long range shooting is they want as much magnification as humanly possible, right? So you'll hear people saying, oh, I want a 50 power scope or something like that, etc. But in reality, you really only need 10, 12, 15, 18 power to shoot 1,000 yards. You really don't need as much as you think. Now this optic specifically is a 4-32. I have this same optic in a 2.5-20, but I also have optics in the 2-10 range or 3-18 range, and so on and so forth, 4-27 range. But when you're selecting your optic, just make sure not to go overboard in terms of the magnification that you can get. Again, note you can do it with around 15 power with ease. So aside from magnification, You have a few options. You can go with mils or mil radians and also minutes of angle. So again, that's personal preference. Pick whichever one works best. They're both looking at measuring angles. So whichever one you prefer and is easier in your head, that's the one you should probably go for. And let me know if you'd like to do any kind of mils versus MOA differences. I think that's really interesting, and I may do a video in the future on it. But for now, I just wanted to touch on that. There are some optics out there that are first and second focal plane. I prefer first focal plane optics, meaning that your subtensions in your optic, like your reticle, is accurate at any magnification range. Second focal plane optics have to be at maximum magnification for the subtensions in the reticle to be accurate. And again, we can do a video on that if you really want to dive down deep into it, because I totally geek out on that stuff. But again, I prefer first focal plane optics. There are some people that prefer second focal plane optics, but for me, first focal plane is my choice. I also really like a good comprehensive reticle and good turrets. Those are big for me when I'm looking at optics, aside from magnification range, glass quality, and so on and so forth in terms of just the general quality of the optic. But a good quality reticle that gives you a lot of information, not too much information, but your general Christmas tree reticle is what I prefer. This has the Mil XT reticle. This is an NX8. And this is one of my favorite reticles from Nightforce. Turret-wise, there are plenty of turret options. There are turrets that lock, meaning that you push down to lock them, you lift up to unlock them, and you can make your adjustments. This one has a uncapped elevation turret and a capped windage turret. This works really well for me because I always dial for elevation and hold for windage. And again, pick your poison, but make sure you just get good comprehensive turrets. And one thing that I really like to have is a good hard zero stop. So it means you can just dial whatever you want to dial. You can be anywhere in your turret. But when you need to make sure to return to your zero, which I zero my rifles at 100 yards, all you got to do is dial down and it dead stops, like really hard at your 100-yard zero. So that's one thing that I really like and honestly need in turrets, because I'll get lost if I don't have it. I'm like, where's my zero? Is it at this revolution, at this revolution? And there are even optics out there that have like revolution counters. This one has a couple lines the turret will essentially raise up, and I could tell what revolution I'm on. I have some vortex razors. When I go on a revolution, a little pin comes out and lets me know. But again, personal preference here. Just find something that's going to work best for you, that you can understand. Last, or next, is parallax. I always like to have a side focus parallax. Some of the optics that you'll get, like hunting style optics and whatnot, their parallax is set at 100 yards. You want a parallax adjustment on the side of your optic to make sure that you're able to set that correctly. And we can go into parallax in another video. Parallax is kind of confusing. It took me a little bit to kind of really fully understand what parallax was. But make sure you have adjustable parallax and reticle illumination if you'd like. I've got it on all my optics. I rarely use it. But again, this is going to be the most important piece of the puzzle right here. Make sure you get yourself a good rifle and other stuff, but your optic is going to mean the most, right? So say you need to dial in 10.9 mils. You want to make sure that every time you dial in 10.9 mils, it's exactly 10.9 mils. You want to make sure that everything is correct on it. It's going to hold zero. It's not going to come loose on you, anything like that. So optic-wise, this is kind of where I like to invest in most, or the most heavily. But again, you don't have to go super crazy to get a good optic as well. So also, while we're on optic, make sure you get yourself a good set of rings and other accessories. I like to use flip caps. These come with the Nightforce optic, and I really like these. They're really nice to have. Kind of protects your lens, keeps gunk off of them, dust, debris, anything like that until you're ready to shoot, and so forth. So cool. So after optics, let's touch base on ammunition next, and then we'll move into maybe some accessories. All right, so moving over to ammunition. So when you're selecting ammo for your precision rifle, you really want to look at the match flavor of ammunition. And match ammo has a lot of perks. It usually uses a heavier bullet, a match style bullet with maybe a match style powder and match style primer. But the biggest thing that you see out of match ammunition compared to just training ammunition is consistency. And what I mean by that is your case is consistently sized, the brass is usually trimmed to the same length, the powder charge within the cartridge is going to be very, very close to the exact same each time. So say you have 24 grains of powder in one, and then the next one is 26.5, and then the next one is 25.7, and so forth. Your velocities are going to be all over the place. So with match ammunition, you'll be at 24 essentially each time. Again, depending on the quality of the ammunition. Again, touching base on the projectile, they usually use match bullets that are seated to the same depth. So one's not hanging super far out, one's not seated way in. Essentially what's going to happen is when you load this cartridge, it's going to do the exact same every single time you pull the trigger to hopefully group. And again, even though it's match ammunition, your rifle may not like it. Certain brands, try out as many as you can and find the one that works the best in your rifle and produces the best groups. And if you shoot under a chronograph, which I highly recommend, find the ones that shoot the lowest SDs and the lowest extreme spreads on those. So again, just touching base on match ammunition, you'll probably see a term, you'll see it on the box as well. It's called BC. It stands for ballistic coefficient. And in short, pick the highest number, right? So what that really means is ballistic coefficient is how the round fights environmental factors. Does it have good wind deflection? How does it fly through the air, etc.? So the higher the ballistic coefficient, the better the round is going to fly in the air. So if you have no idea about match ammunition, anything like that, and you're looking at two different boxes, I would usually pick the one that has the better ballistic coefficient. It's just going to make it a little bit easier to shoot targets at distance. One thing that I would look for as well, this will go hand in hand with ballistic coefficient, but I like to shoot a little heavier bullet per caliber. Just make sure you pick something in the mild to heavier bullet weight, just because, again, it's going to have better ballistic coefficient, and when it flies through the air, it will be affected by environmental factors less. We can go into this as well, but there are also two ways to measure drag. There's G1 and G7. Don't get confused on those. Just make sure you check the box, and if you're comparing a G1 ballistic coefficient, make sure you're comparing it to the other manufacturer's G1 ballistic coefficient. G7 is different. It's about like roughly around the half mark. So you can have a rifle, you could be looking at a box of ammunition, you could be looking at a G7 coefficient and a G1 coefficient and not know the differences. Be like, oh my gosh, this G1 coefficient is significantly higher, I'm going to select this. But in reality, the G7 coefficient, even though it's a lower number, it's a different way of measuring the drag. So the G7 may be more ballistically advantageous than the G1. Again, I'm sorry if that's confusing, but just do your homework and make sure that you select the appropriate cartridge for shooting long range. So last but not least is some of the gear that will help you shoot out to those long distances. And first things first is a ballistic calculator. A lot of shooters use Kestrel. These are fairly expensive kind of ballistic calculators and weather stations all in one. If you're just getting started and you don't want to shell out $300, $400, or $500 for one, there are good apps on the App Store. They're even free. Some are free, I think some are like $5 or $10 that really do essentially the same thing. And the nice thing is all you do is plug in your bullet velocity, you plug in which bullet, its ballistic coefficient, kind of a couple weather parameters. Some apps even pull from like your weather app on your phone, so all you got to do is just use your location and it automatically uploads that, and essentially it kind of spits out the correction that you need to dial in your optic or hold in your reticle to make an accurate, or at least close to accurate, shot. And just note with these, they're kind of garbage in, garbage out. So when you're inputting your data and parameters, just make sure you're putting in everything as correct as possible. So when it spits out the calculation, it is as close to accurate as possible. You may have to do something called truing ballistic coefficient or truing velocity, so on and so forth. But again, we can get into that in another video. Just make sure you have yourself a good ballistic calculator. I didn't touch base on the ammunition department, but box velocity on ammunition usually isn't worth a whole ton. I like to use a chronograph, and I use a MagnetoSpeed V3 on this mount right here. This is a Wiser Precision. It's a spigot mount for this, so it doesn't mount to my barrel. It mounts to this and essentially can read my velocities. And again, we can do a video on this in a later date. Just set that right here. But one thing that helps me a lot is a chronograph, and I know these things can be fairly expensive, but they really let you know what your rifle is doing every single time you pull the trigger in terms of velocity numbers, and if your velocity is fluctuating, so on and so forth. So if you can afford a chronograph, they are a very valuable tool to have. And there are great ones out there. I mean, Lab Radar is essentially a Doppler radar. They're pretty expensive, but the MagnetoSpeed V3 on the spigot mount has been great for me. And again, it touches base on when you're inputting velocities and so forth into your ballistic calculator. Since box velocity isn't 100% accurate, it really helps you get good data out from what you put into your ballistic calculator, so you aren't chasing everything around. I may do a video on it later, but I can show you essentially how to true velocity or find your velocity in some of these apps or in some of these things. Say you don't have a chronograph and you have a target out at distance. What you can do is essentially you can look at your impacts and kind of correlate it to how many mils or minutes of angle that you're dialing in your optic or holding in your optic. And essentially you can kind of cross-reference those and tune your velocity. So you can find it without a chronograph, or at least get closer than box velocity. But it's kind of a chore. But if you'd like to see it, let me know. I think it'd be fun to do. Kind of takes you back and tests your skills, if you will. But another thing that you can use is a spotting scope. This usually helps if you have a spotter. If you're shooting by yourself, you probably don't need one. But this one's nice to have because it has a mil reticle in it. And if I shoot mil reticled optics, and the nice thing is if I have somebody spotting for me, they have the data in this spotting scope to help me call corrections. So say I miss a target 0.8 mils to the right. My spotter can see my miss 0.8 mils to the right, and he can give me the correction of, hey, 0.8 mils to the right. And since I'm also shooting in mils, I can make that correction quickly, accurately, and I don't have to sit here and think in my head, okay, how many inches did I say? He said half a target. That target's how big? And kind of do all this math in my head to make that correction. But anyways, I digress from this. Another good tool that I like to use is a good rangefinder. This is a SIG Kilo. I think it goes on with like 2,200 yards or something like that. There are rangefinders that will even spit out ballistic data and stuff like that, but you really only need one of these if you're shooting at a known distance range. If you're shooting at a range that has known distances, like targets at 500, 600, 700, etc., and they're marked, save your money and put it towards some glass or put it towards some ammunition, something like that. You probably don't need a rangefinder off the bat. Some things that I like to use are bipods for the front of my rifle. There are plenty of options. Say you can shoot off of your shooting bag, like shoot off a bag. You can shoot off of a rest. Bipods are easy for me. I shoot off of, to be honest, all three at times, but bipods are pretty easy. When I'm shooting with my chronograph, this has a 1913 attachment. This is an Atlas bipod that has a 1913 attachment. What I do is I usually shoot off of a rest for my rifle, and then I attach the spigot mount to where my bipod would attach on my rifle. So again, play around with it, find what works best with you, but just know that there are plenty of options for front rests for your rifle. For the rear, I like to use a squeeze bag, and these are pretty cheap. You can get them for like 30 bucks, even cheaper than that. You can even make some at home. I mean, I know people that their wives fill up like socks with rice in them or sand, and it's really nice. You essentially set your gross adjustments with your bipod or your rest or something like that. So when you're in your natural point of aim and aiming your rifle, the rifle's essentially pointing at the right target, at the target that you're going to shoot at. And then you put a rear bag underneath your stock, and what you can kind of do is squeeze this and let it go you can kind of vary the tension that you put on this bag, and what it does is it will finely adjust the butt or stock of your rifle up or down just ever so slightly. So it's really cool to like fine tune where your rifle sits and where your natural point of aim is with one of these bags. I definitely highly recommend one, and they're super cheap, and again, you can even make them at home. And last thing that I use, again, not really necessary, but I like it. It is a barrel cooler system. This one's made by Magneto Speed, just like the chronograph. But say I'm shooting a high string of fire, and especially with a suppressor or a silencer on the end, that gun can stay hot for a long time. So what I like to do is, say I have a little break in a string of fire, I'll pop this bad boy out, put it in my ejection port, turn it on, and what it does is essentially blows cool air down the bore. Kind of cools off the barrel, cools off the muzzle, everything like that, or cools off the suppressor. So it reduces stringing, essentially, or groups opening up when the barrel gets too hot. But anyways, that's about it. I appreciate y'all bearing with me. This turned out to be a good bit longer video than I initially anticipated it. But again, I really appreciate y'all hanging out with me and sticking until the end, if you made it until the end. But y'all know the drill. Hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, hit that notification bell, tell your friends, tell your family, tell your dog. Tell your dog I said hi. We'll see you in the next one.